And war returns to the Middle East. The US president saying the interim deal signed with Iran last month is over. He's also lashed out at NATO allies in Ankara for their failure to support Washington's offensive against Tehran. The US and Iran also trading blame for truce violations.
As far as I'm concerned, it's over.
Donald Trump calling dealings with Tehran, quote, a waste of time, casting doubt on any prospects for future negotiations. Iran in turn accusing Washington of, quote, treaty breaking. US forces launching strikes overnight on more than 80 targets, citing the need to respond to unknown projectiles on 3 ships in the Strait of Hormuz this week. Iran retaliating by firing on American bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. But immediate backing from NATO's chief. Mark Rutte says American strikes were, quote, absolutely necessary. Support from others as well in the alliance, but pushback on other issues. The US president singling out Spain as, quote, a terrible NATO partner over insufficient spending on its own defense and failure to step up support for US in its war on Iran, threatening a suspension of trade ties with Spain. On Greenland, Donald Trump renewing his demand for control, calling European resistance to that a big problem. And a quick check on how the oil market is reacting. Futures on the rise after the exchange of fire in the Middle East. Prices reaching a 2-week high as fears of disruption to supply grow. Brent gaining more than 5%. But still below the $80 per barrel mark. WTI closer to $74 per barrel. And more, Jagruti Dave joins us live from Washington, D.C. and William Denselow covering the NATO summit for us for CNA live in Ankara. Jagruti, let's start with you. Mr. Trump's latest remarks on Iran, they're fiery as they often are. What are the implications we can read into these remarks?
Well, Wesu, the ceasefire has been on shaky ground before. More than 10 days ago, the two sides exchanged tit-for-tat strikes over the Strait of Hormuz. And it's happened again with the president both saying the ceasefire is over, but on the other hand, leaving the door open for negotiations, even though he said that they are a waste of time. The problem is the whole point of this ceasefire was to try to normalize trade through the Strait of Hormuz. And unfortunately, oil prices have shot up 5% since the resumption of tensions. And I think in this instance, things are complicated by the fact that the timing has happened during the NATO summit, where relations with NATO allies and the US are already tense, with the president accusing NATO of not upholding their side of defense spending, or in fact coming to the US's aid over the war in Iran. So whilst the two sides have come back to the table and the situation has the potential to delay things, I think observers are hoping it won't completely derail them. But as I say, the context is ever so slightly different now.
All right, well, let's bring you in on this. Mark Rutte has been very clear that he backs US strikes or return to strikes on Iran. How would you break down those comments of coming from the NATO chief?
Well, those messages from Mark Rutte are somewhat expected. He has been a stalwart supporter of the Trump administration and the US president. He said that it was absolutely necessary for the US to respond to a violation in this ceasefire. That was a comment reiterated really by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, who has commended President Trump and what he said was his determination as part of this conflict going forward. As far as the broader NATO alliance is concerned, there were a huge amount of trepidation, considering the fact that many of these allies were very sceptical about Operation Epic Fury to begin with. They didn't want any part of it. That is a major reason for President Trump's consternation with NATO allies at this summit. Many would have been coming here hoping to get further clues from the Trump administration as to how they will achieve stability in the Middle East and ensure a smooth passage through the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, here, based on President Trump's words, it seems that the opposite might have been achieved.
Jagruti, the consternation that NATO's European members have felt on any possible response from Donald Trump, they have, we saw yesterday, a string of significant deals on defense procurement, defense manufacture as well. Any sign that these have done any good in terms of appeasing the US president?
Well, I think you hear comments from Donald Trump, and he has continued to reiterate some of the criticism of NATO allies. Two in particular. One, he's taken aim at Spain again, accusing them of not spending enough on defense. Spain is the only NATO ally that is not committed to 5% GDP spending on defense. And Donald Trump has said that Spain is a terrible partner in NATO. They don't participate, they don't pay, and he's threatened to cut off all trade with Spain, including visits. Now, noted, this isn't the first time that the president has made such comments about Spain, and in previous occasions, the two sides have continued trading as usual. The second thing he's done is reiterated the threats to Greenland, saying that the US should be the one to control Greenland, not Denmark. Now, in previous occasions, allies have stood up to the president, and the president has, in a sense, capitulated because there has been a working group between the US, Greenland and Denmark to come to a framework deal. But this time, the president has threatened to withdraw all troops from Europe. So again, in the context of the war with Iran, which is different this time to the previous time that he's made these comments, you can see that the president is becoming quite trenchant and quite frustrated with the military situation, and is repeating these threats to Greenland, which I think allies thought had been previously put to bed.
All right. Will, so it's not just specifically Spain and Denmark feeling the threats towards Greenland. The rest of Europe has reason to be concerned by what Donald Trump says.
Especially when it comes, well, these issues are very much interwoven. This narrative from the Trump administration that Europe is not doing enough to keep its end of the bargain for the NATO alliance, and is certainly not keeping its end of the bargain when it comes to keeping the European continent safe, or even keeping US interests on the continent safe. Now, there is a through line here. If you look at the comments regarding Greenland, President Trump has reiterated that its interests are not being protected by Denmark or European allies. If you look at Spain, they're one of the nations that have been more reluctant to boost defence spending to that 5% figure by the year 2035. And more broadly, President Trump and his administration has set a 6-month window for European allies to essentially prove that they are taking tangible steps to take control of European security as the US looks to put more attention into other theatres around the world. So this common narrative coming through, Europe, especially in the NATO alliance, must do more. Here in Ankara, those allies have said repeatedly that they are boosting defence spending and turning that into hard procurement. But seemingly from remarks from the Trump administration, it seems to be falling on some deaf ears from the US president.
Oh, thanks for that. William Denselow reporting for CNN in Ankara. That's where the NATO summits are being held. And Jagruti Dave live in Washington, D.C. for us.